The world held its breath. The tension was palpable, as people from all corners of the globe tuned in to witness a moment that could alter the course of history. On February 15, 2025, President Trump issued a stark ultimatum to Hamas release all 70 Israeli hostages. His voice was unwavering, his message clear. The deadline, noon, Washington, D.C. time. The clock was ticking, and every second brought the world closer to a potential crisis. Failure, Trump warned, would bring severe consequences. The gravity of his words echoed through the halls of power and across the airwaves. The United States would stand firmly behind any Israeli response. This declaration of unwavering support was a signal to allies and adversaries alike. The message was clear. Hamas had a choice to make, a choice with potentially devastating consequences. The world watched as the militant group weighed its options. Trump's move was bold, some would say reckless. Analysts and commentators were quick to voice their opinions, dissecting every word and predicting possible outcomes. It injected a volatile new element into an already combustible situation. The region, already fraught with tension, now faced an even greater risk of escalation. Hamas, known for its intransigence, now faced immense pressure. The eyes of the world were upon them, and their next move could change everything. The world waited anxiously to see how they would respond. In homes, cafes, and public squares, people held their breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Diplomats and military strategists worked tirelessly, knowing that the outcome of this standoff could have far-reaching implications. Lives hung in the balance. Families of the hostages clung to hope, their emotions swinging between despair and optimism as the deadline approached. As the deadline approached, tension mounted. The world held its breath, waiting for any sign of resolution. Then, news broke. Hamas released 3 Israeli captives: Alexander Sasha Trufanov, Sagui Dekel-Chen, a US-Israeli citizen, and Ayer Horn. The news spread like wildfire, bringing a mix of relief and cautious optimism. It was a partial concession, a glimmer of hope in a dark hour. Families who had been holding their breath for days finally exhaled, tears of joy streaming down their faces as they embraced their loved ones. Yet, the fate of the remaining hostages remained unknown. The joy of the moment was tempered by the grim reality that many were still missing. Their families left in agonizing uncertainty. Why did Hamas make this move? Was it a strategic decision, a gesture of goodwill, or a calculated maneuver in a larger game of political chess? Was it a sign of weakness, a desperate attempt to avoid a full-scale Israeli assault? The Israeli military remained on high alert, ready to respond to any provocation. Or was it a calculated ploy, designed to buy time and sow discord within Israel? Analysts debated the implications, with opinions divided on the true motives behind the release. Whatever the reason, the release of the 3 hostages offered a brief respite, a moment to assess the rapidly evolving situation. It was a fleeting moment of relief in an otherwise tense and uncertain landscape, a small victory in a conflict far from over. Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his gratitude to President Trump. He credited the US president's firm stance, coupled with the IDF's increased presence around Gaza, for securing the hostages' release. Yet the joy was tempered by the knowledge that dozens remained captive. The Israeli Security Cabinet convened. The question before them was agonizing: how to secure the release of the remaining hostages without further endangering their lives. The pressure was immense, both from within Israel and from the international community. Netanyahu faced a defining moment in his leadership, a test of his resolve and his judgment. Across the ocean, President Trump confirmed the release of the 3 hostages. He reiterated America's unwavering support for Israel, emphasizing that the United States stood ready to back any decision Israel made regarding the remaining captives and the broader situation in Gaza. Trump's words sent a clear message to both Israel and Hamas. America's commitment to Israel's security was ironclad. It was a message that resonated deeply with many in Israel, but also drew criticism from those who saw it as emboldening hardliners on both sides. Section 5 IDF on high alert. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, were not standing idly by. Under the command of Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, the IDF prepared for any eventuality. Offensive plans were drawn up, contingencies considered, and troops and equipment moved into position. The IDF was ready to act, should the order come. The message to Hamas was unmistakable: release the hostages or face the consequences. The situation was a powder keg, and the fuse had been lit. Section 6. Echoes of a Dark Day. The hostage crisis cast a long shadow over Israel. It had been 500 days since the devastating Hamas attack of October 7, 2024. That day, etched in the memory of every Israeli, served as a stark reminder of the human cost of the conflict. The current crisis reopened old wounds, fueling anxieties and stoking demands for retribution. The public demanded action, but what action was both effective and morally justifiable? It was a question that haunted the nation. Section 7. Mistreatment and outrage. Adding to the anguish were reports of the horrific treatment endured by the released hostages. Whippings, beatings, starvation. These were just some of the horrors they had suffered at the hands of their Hamas captors. The world reacted with outrage. The brutality meted out by Hamas served only to harden attitudes and make a peaceful resolution even more elusive. It was a reminder of the depths of hatred and the challenges in finding a path to reconciliation. Section 8. Trump's controversial plan. Trump's ultimatum came against the backdrop of his controversial Gaza plan. The plan, aimed at resolving the decades-old conflict, had drawn criticism from both Israelis and Palestinians. Some saw it as biased toward Israel, while others questioned its feasibility. The hostage crisis further complicated matters. It put immense pressure on Netanyahu to take a hard line, potentially jeopardizing any chance of reviving the peace process. Section 9. Shifting sands of geopolitics. The hostage crisis and Trump's ultimatum sent shockwaves through the region. The situation was tense, with every move being scrutinized by the international community. The stakes were incredibly high, and the world was on edge, waiting to see how the events would unfold. The ultimatum was not just a political maneuver, it was a test of wills, a challenge that could either lead to a resolution or plunge the region into deeper chaos. It was a stark reminder of the volatile dynamics at play in the Middle East. The region has long been a powder keg, with historical grievances and modern-day politics intertwining in a complex dance. The streets were filled with protesters, and the military presence was a constant reminder of the fragile peace that hung by a thread. The images of conflict were not just scenes from a distant land, they were a reflection of the deep-seated issues that have plagued the region for decades. It also underscored the complex web of alliances and rivalries that shaped the region's politics. Diplomatic meetings were held behind closed doors, with political leaders trying to navigate the treacherous waters of regional alliances. The maps of alliances and rivalries were constantly shifting, with new partnerships forming and old ones dissolving. The political landscape was as unpredictable as the desert sands, and every decision had far-reaching consequences. What did the future hold? Political analysts debated endlessly, each with their own predictions and theories. The pensive crowds watching the news on television were a testament to the uncertainty that gripped the region. People were anxious, hoping for a glimmer of hope, but preparing for the worst. The future was a blank canvas, and the actions of a few could paint a picture of peace or conflict. Would Hamas release the remaining hostages? The negotiations were intense, with every word and gesture being analyzed. The fate of the hostages hung in the balance, and their release could be a turning point in the crisis. The world watched with bated breath, hoping for a breakthrough but fearing a deadlock. The hostages were not just pawns in a political game, they were human beings whose lives were at stake. Would Israel launch a risky rescue operation? The military was on high alert, with soldiers preparing for a possible mission. The decision to launch a rescue operation was fraught with risks, and the consequences could be dire. The images of soldiers in action and military vehicles ready for deployment were a stark reminder of the high stakes involved. The question was not just about strategy, it was about the lives that could be lost or saved. Or would the two sides find a way to de-escalate the crisis? Peace talks were underway, with diplomats working tirelessly to broker a ceasefire agreement. The discussions were intense, with every word carrying the weight of potential peace or continued conflict. The signing of a ceasefire agreement could be a beacon of hope, a sign that diplomacy could prevail over violence. The world hoped for a peaceful resolution, but the path to peace was fraught with challenges. The answers to these questions would have profound implications, not only for Israel and Hamas, but for the entire region. The cityscapes and markets were a stark contrast to the conflict zones, a reminder of the everyday lives that were affected by the geopolitical struggles. The decisions made in the coming days would shape the future of the region, impacting millions of lives. The stakes were incredibly high, and the world watched with a mix of hope and apprehension. The world watched and waited, hoping for a peaceful resolution but bracing for the possibility of further conflict. Newsrooms around the globe were abuzz with updates, and people from different countries tuned in, united by their concern for the region. Peace rallies and protests were held, with people voicing their hopes for a resolution. The world was a stage, and the Middle East was at the center of it, with everyone hoping for a peaceful outcome but preparing for the worst.